And in this work, she recreates inmates' memories of specific places. So welcome, Amy. So Amy's going to talk a little bit about her work tonight, but before that, I just want everyone to know that in addition to her studio practice, she's an award-winning costume maker. So Amy, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your Halloween costume this year.
So I've only ever won one award for a costume. Last year, I was a fusilli, like piece of pasta. And then my husband was a penne pasta, and we decided on Halloween to go out to Emmy's Spaghetti Shack to have dinner, and it turned out they were having a costume contest. Which is totally random, but it was very exciting, and then we won, and we got free dinner that night. Can I put that on my resume?
I think it should be at the top. Yeah, education, award-winning, yeah, easily. So you work out of an Oakland studio collective called Real Time and Space, but you're also the studio director there. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a little about what's so special about that community and how it feeds your own art practice.
I feel like Real Time and Space is like my family, basically. My friend Emma Spurtis, she started that space with her husband, Mark Taylor, and I was very lucky to be invited to have my studio there when she started it. And a couple years ago, basically, I took over running it from her. But everybody that I've met through that space has become like a good friend, and I just feel like it's a very, very supportive community, which sometimes in the art world things can get competitive and not so fun. But at RTS, I feel like RTS is Real Time and Space. I feel like everybody is truly supportive of each other and caring, and I have 3 RTS friends here today.
And my final question. So you've been working with incarcerated artists at San Quentin for 5 years now, and I'm sure that there's many people in this audience who might want to kind of step into the waters of prison reform or knowing how to get involved in prison arts projects, so maybe you have some advice for them today. Where to start?
I guess one of my hopes is that we can actually break down the barriers between people who are inside and people who are outside. And San Quentin, weirdly, is actually like a place that anybody could visit, unless you're on parole or have like a family member incarcerated at San Quentin. Otherwise, anybody could visit, and I think maybe that would be kind of an interesting way to start, just to see like what is prison like inside. And then there's also actually a ton of public programming at San Quentin. Like they have performances that people from the public can actually attend. Often like seating is sort of limited, so you have to sign up sort of early, but if you look up like the Marin Shakespeare Company, like they hold like multiple performances every year at San Quentin, and some of those stories are actually written by the men themselves.
Woo! Thank you, Amy. I'll let you take it away.
So since I'm a visual artist, I'm not able to like show you my actual work here today, so I just have images of the work. And before I talk about the series that I've been working on more recently, I thought I'd start with some older work to sort of set the stage, so you can get a sense of like the type of visual work I do. So I'm an installation artist, and I'm mostly interested in how we inhabit and experience space. And when I say that, I sort of mean how we like move through space and how space itself influences our emotions and our experiences. And one of the reasons why I was originally like drawn to that subject matter is because I think it's a very universal experience. Like you can't be a person in this world and not navigate through space in some way. So I found it to be sort of like a way to tie people together. So a lot of the works that I do are, I create these sort of illusionary spaces, and they exist in this place between a physical experience and a conscious emotional experience. So in this image, there's a projected space on the real wall, but it sort of is a continuation of the gallery space into the illusionary space. So you can sort of see like where the real room ends and then the illusionary space begins. So this is sorry, I should say that last piece was at like a gallery in upstate New York. So this piece was more local. It was at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts a couple years ago. It's in like this stairwell sort of space where normally they have work on that wall, but it's usually right at eye level, and that wall actually goes from the first floor all the way to the second floor. So I was really interested in sort of like the verticalness of the space. So I wanted to use the whole length of the wall. So I created this imaginary staircase, and this one isn't a projection. That last piece you saw was a video projection. This one's actually a print on vinyl. So you can sort of see, this is the view from downstairs, and when you're standing looking at this work, you're kind of, because of the way the staircase is, you're sort of forced to stand right up against the walls. You're really like looking way up. And then as you walk to the second floor and you stand, or the landing between the first floor and the second floor, you have a completely different view where you're looking straight down that imaginary staircase. And then when you get up to the second floor, you have another view where you're looking all the way down. So I'm very interested in how, like, moving through space, how your perspective changes, and how your experience changes as well. And then, so this is the last sort of image before the work that I'm sort of doing right now. This is also another illusionary space. It was projected inside this is a video projection, and it was projected inside a completely dark room. So when you walk in, all you see, well, you see darkness all around you, and then the only thing you see is that imaginary arch. And I should say that all of the imaginary spaces that are projected here are created. I make these like miniature architectural models essentially, and then photograph them. And basically, because they're all architectural models, none of them exist as real spaces. They're all objects. So they're basically objects that become transformed into spaces through our own imagination. And to me, that's something sort of interesting, that I can create something that people will believe is a space just by manipulating the sort of situation. So 5 years ago, I started teaching at St. Quentin. When I started teaching there, I was really like kind of wondering how, I believe a lot in like human rights and prison reform, and I was sort of like, as an artist, how do I participate in that, and how do I like sort of forward prison reform? And so I got in touch through a friend who knew this organization, William James Association, and I started volunteering with them and teaching inside, and it completely changed my life and transformed my life. I don't think when I started going in that I had any like specific expectations of what it would be like. I wanted to go in with an open mind, but after I started meeting all the incarcerated artists that I now work with, it was just like amazing to hear about how, like, I mean, there are days and times when like they'll be working super hard on an art piece and they'll bring it back to their cell, and then there'll be a search and the cops will like throw their artwork away, and then they'll come back to class and be like, oh, it got confiscated, I have to start all over, but they do it. And that kind of like dedication, I feel like, is just in an atmosphere where it's just so stifling. It's just really inspiring for me, because as an artist outside, I think it's really easy to get caught up in like the career part of being an artist, and it's easy to forget, like, why am I making this work? Like, is it actually like important to me? And like seeing how transformative art making was for them, it completely like changed my own experience of art making. And so a big part of teaching inside, my class doesn't have like, we don't do like formal lectures or anything, so it's very like, I work with each person individually and figure out where they are and what their art goals are. And some people have never made art in their lives, and some people have been making art longer than I have. So I'm really like working with each person to figure out what they want to do. And so because of that, I've really gotten to know like every person that I work with really well. And because of the way the class is, you like sign up for the class and then you can just sort of stay. So some of the people I work with, I've been working with the entire 5 years that I've been inside. So I see them more often than I see like friends outside. So I've gotten to know them like really, really well. And because we're basically sitting around making art, we're talking a lot. And what ended up happening, and I think a lot of people who have like either been in prison or like worked in a prison would probably say the same thing, but a big part of prison is hearing all the stories that people tell. Like everybody inside has like amazing stories. And I noticed that when we were sitting around, people would tell all these stories about their lives before prison. And I knew, because I know some of the guys have been inside for a really long time, that these stories were like literally from 30, 40 years ago, like, because some of the people I work with have been incarcerated for that long. And so, but they were telling them like it happened yesterday. So it was sort of like, wow, these, even though like they're being so casual, I know this is like really important to them because they've been holding on to this memory and telling and retelling this story for like ages. So then I started to sort of reflect on like how I could preserve these stories in some way. And I started writing them down, but I'm not a writer. So I was like, okay, I have to make art, you know, to like preserve these stories. And so I went in and I asked the guys that I work with, would you be interested in collaborating with me on a project where we basically recreated, because I'm interested in space, that we recreated the spaces from these stories that you're telling. So that's what the project that I've been working on now. So this is a picture of some of the guys I work with and some of the other teachers. This is what the classroom looks like inside. It's pretty small, but we managed to like cram a bunch of people in there. And a lot of the guys when we're in there are like, I'm not in prison, but I'm in here, so it's like pretty awesome. And so for the project that I've been doing, basically what I did was I asked my collaborators, each of them, to like make a visual art piece about the space that they would like to have recreated as an installation. And so each person chose like a very different space. And so this piece that's up right now is by Bobby Dean Evans. So he was the first collaborator that I worked with, and he chose the garage from his childhood home. And he was telling me how like he used to work on his bike there when he was younger, and it was before like all the craziness of prison and all that sort of stuff. So that time in his life, he like basically that space to him represented all the hope that he had at that point in his life, and it was before basically everything bad that happened. And so that's why the garage was super special to him. And he didn't start making art till he was incarcerated, but he worked on his bike in this space, and he felt like that was like his way of being creative at that time. So then I recreated the garage as a really abstracted installation, and here's my version of it. There are some like similarities, but it's also very like pared down. When I created my space, I was thinking a lot about like what does memory feel like, and like all the details that we forget when we remember things. So I left it very kind of open-ended so that anybody who came to see this work might actually insert their own memories into the space as well. So there's a couple other shots of this installation. This is the view from behind. You can see like the projected image is a recreation of the things that were in the garage. And in this show, I also included a copy of Title 15, which is all the laws that govern how inmates are supposed to live and how they're supposed to be treated. And to me, it's kind of based on a lot of the things that people have told me. Creativity and imagination is like so important in prison, and the sort of anything in your head, like imagination and memory, and sort of like dreams. And if you ever look through Title 15, or if you've ever looked through it before, it basically like outlines everything about how a person lives physically, like how much food you're supposed to get, like how often. There's a part where it's like if you're pregnant, this is the amount of milk you're supposed to get every day. And like how you're supposed to keep your hair. It's really insane. But despite like how regulated their lives are, there's just no way you can govern imagination and freedom and creativity. And I included it as a contrast to like the art that we were making together. So the next piece I wanted to show is with this guy Dennis Crooks, and he's actually out now living in LA, and he's doing really well. But this is a painting of that he made of the hallway in his childhood home. So I feel like this photo doesn't do the painting justice because it's actually like really huge in real life and really beautiful. And then here's my recreation of it. And then there's a more recent project that I've been doing, and it sort of came out of the political atmosphere that we're experiencing right now. There was a project, 100 Days Action, that some artists were putting together to sort of ask other artists to like respond to the political atmosphere and submit ideas to be part of this. And so I went inside and I asked some of the guys, do you guys have anything you want to create or work on that would be a reflection of what's happening politically? And one of the guys I was talking to, his name's Ronell Draper, but he goes by Roach. Roach was saying, I want a platform for people to speak freely. And at that time, there were like all these, there still are all these protests happening outside. And I was kind of like, well, I feel like for us outside, that's our outlet, like that's our platform to like say how we feel. But obviously there isn't like an equivalent of protesting inside. There sort of is, but if you're going to protest inside, you'd have to be pretty dedicated, and there have been instances of protests, but anyways, it's much more difficult. And so we were talking, and I was kind of like, well, what if the things you guys wanted to say, I like brought it to the world outside, and so we came up with an idea to do this all through Instagram. So Roach has been collecting quotes from guys inside, like things they want to say, and then I'm posting them on our Instagram page, and it's called Voices from San Quentin. They're all like all over the place. Like everybody who's participated has something different to say, so there's no like unifying theme necessarily. And then I also wanted to say, so here's an example of one of the quotes that we have. This one's from Lumumba. And I just wanted to say that Roach painted all the backgrounds that are sort of the images behind the text. I think that's the last thing I wanted to say. So thank you so much to KQED, and thank you to Sarah for including me as part of this series. Thank you.